cup at a time. Yeah, this is tea time. Yeah, making a difference. One cup at a time. So be sure to grab your tea, grab a seat, and tune in to Miss Liz. Tea time. Making a difference. One cup at a time. Tea time, yeah. Tea time.
Well, welcome everybody. We are back for the afternoon tea time. That's right. We did this morning. Now we're back this afternoon. And how about that beat, right? We just getting the groove moving. We're just moving. This afternoon, we're going to be talking about Crohn's disease, and we're going to be talking about women's gender and sexuality studies and all of that good stuff. We're going to talk some sex again. That's right, Miss Liz, this Thursday, it's all about sex, but we're doing sex in a different way. We're doing it in a clean awareness style way. And we're going to bring some awareness to Crohn's disease. So we're going to get started. I have Ed in the back just waiting to come and share a good, strong cup of tea with all of you guys this afternoon. And we're going to bring some awareness, and we're going to get Ed's story out there. So for all of you listeners out there that are listening, please share this tea time and subscribe to that YouTube channel, ring that bell so you're notified every time we're live and we're having a good strong cup of tea at Miss Liz's house with the TEA, a different way of serving tea. So we're going to get the disclaimer going, the bio, all that good stuff, and then I'm going to have Ed come in while I sit back and have a sip of my tea. Disclaimer for Miss Liz's Tea Time live show. Miss Liz myself is going live using StreamYard. Before leaving a comment, please grant StreamYard permission to see your name at StreamYard.com. Please be advised that the content brought forward for any Tea Time show hosted by myself, Miss Liz, is always brought forward in good faith. However, may bring forth dialogues and opinions that are not representative of my platform. The facts and information are perceived to be accurate at the given time of airing. All Tea Time guests and audience participants are responsible for using their good judgment in taking any action that may relate to the discussion. The content brought forward may include discussion for some where they may be emotionally at risk. It is significant to know that this show is engaging in discussion forums only to offer and inspire awareness and connection, and is not providing therapeutical advice. If you have any questions about the disclaimer or the panelist discussion, you may freely contact me, Miss Liz, through my email at bookingmissliz@gmail.com. Moving forward, should you choose to voluntarily participate in today's show in any aspect, I myself, Miss Liz, welcomes you. And should you decide that the show is not made for you at this time, I respect your wishes, and we'll see you at a later show at a later date and time. And again, all tea times this year for 2023 are done on Thursday, 10, 3, and 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If it is not a Thursday, it is a rescheduled tea time because life happens, right? So now let me give you a little bit on Ed Cohen. At 13, Ed Cohen was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, a chronic, incurable condition that nearly killed him in his early 20s. At his diagnosis, his doctors told him that the best he could hope for would be periods of remission. Unfortunately, doctors never mentioned healing as a possibility. In On Learning to Heal, Cohen draws on 50 years of living with Crohn's to consider how Western medicine turned from an art of healing towards a science of medicine. Deeply affects both medical practitioners and their patients. He demonstrates that although medicine can now offer many seamlessly, miraculously therapies, Medicine is not and has not been the only way to enhance healing. Exploring his own path to healing, he argues that learning to heal requires us to desire and value healing as a virtual possibility. With his book, Cohen advocates revealing healing role for all those who live whose lives are touched by illness. Ed Cohen is a professor of women's gender and sexuality studies at Rutgers University and author of an A-body word defending, also published by Duke University Press. He hosts a therapeutical practice for people interested in healing, and his website is www.healingcouncil.com. And now let me get Ed in here so I can sip on my tea. Welcome, Ed. I seen you grooving in the back there watching the video. So it had a good beat to it.
It was good. Yeah, it was good.
So, Ed, let's start with you as a little boy to where you are now. At 13, you were diagnosed with Crohn's disease. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Sure, of course. I grew up in a kind of small town in northern Maryland. My family were cultural Jews who lived in a very, very non-Jewish place. And my mother was a communist and my father was a physical chemist. So we were kind of really a kind of different constellation of people for where I grew up. And during, that period of time, my mother was also an anti-war activist, and I was very involved, with her and protesting against the Vietnam War. So I had a kind of general sense of what was going on in the world at the time, which, like now, was not great. And at the age of 13, for some reason or another, we were on a cross-country trip in our dark blue Ford station wagon when I became incontinent. And becoming incontinent on a cross-country trip where rest stops on highways are few and far between really gives you a sense of just how long time can be. So by the time we got back from the cross-country trip, I had lost huge amounts of weight and I was just really enervated. And we got back to New York where my grandmother lived, and she opened the door and took one look at me and she started screaming because apparently I was so emaciated that it was kind of unsettling for her. And after that, I started going to a lot of doctors. First, I went to our local pediatrician, who confirmed, in fact, this was not your normal diarrhea. And then we went to an internist at a local hospital who gave me some tests and x-rays and stuff, and gave me some weird foam that I had to inject in my anus that did nothing. And then they sent me to, as they said, world-renowned, specialist at Johns Hopkins. I live near Baltimore. And he confirmed that I was acutely ill, and that I should be hospitalized. And he sent me to a former resident of his who practiced at University of Maryland Hospital. And I was in the hospital for a while. I mean, you're in Canada, so you actually have medical care that's paid for. But in the U.S., we had really good insurance, so I was in the hospital for diagnostics. They don't do that very much anymore. And I was in there for a while, over a month or so. So instead of starting high school with the rest of my cohort, I, basically had this other learning experience. And as I like to say, while I was there, they left no orifice unprobed. And eventually a team of doctors, because when you're in a teaching hospital, it's always a team, the doctor and the doctors in training, and they came in and they announced to me that they had decided that I had Crohn's disease. That was I think of it as like, on those HGTV shows when they do the reveal,
Ta-da!
You have Crohn's. I'm like, oh, great. And then they tried to tell me what it was, and they're like, well, it's an autoimmune inflammatory bowel disease. It's incurable, but, we can give you some drugs that will try to tamp it down. And, basically, what you can look forward to in your life is managing your symptoms through drugs. And, you'll probably have some surgeries. And, it wasn't a very good, prognosis. I mean, for a 13-year-old. And, but the most mystifying thing was when they were saying, well, you have an autoimmune illness. This is an autoimmune illness. And, I was 13. I mean, I had a big vocabulary, but, that wasn't one of my words. So they tried to break it down for me. The first thing they said was, well, it's like you're allergic to yourself. No, I didn't really quite get that. So they tried another thing. They said, well, it's like part of yourself is rejecting itself. And again, I was like, yeah, I'm not, okay. Finally, they said, well, it's like you're eating yourself alive. Okay. Now that I could understand.
That like, boom.
However, no one should ever say that to anyone. That is especially not a very sick 13-year-old. That is not a good thing to say. And, subsequently over the years, because I've done a lot of research on the history of immunology, the history of medicine, it's not even an accurate way to describe what autoimmunity is. I mean, I don't know what they were thinking. But, nonetheless, that's what I took in, along with the prednisone that I started taking in mass quantities. And again, this was 1972. So, I mean, probably people don't remember that there was a time before the internet, and you just couldn't look things up and find out like what was going on. So nobody ever mentioned that there were side effects to the drugs that I was being given to suppress my immune system. Some people, you might be familiar with prednisone. A lot of people have taken prednisone. It is a miracle drug, saved my life. I'm not, but prednisone is an all-purpose immunosuppressant. It's given for everything from poison ivy to brain tumors. It's just, but it has a lot of side effects. Currently, there are new meds for Crohn's disease that are called biologics, which are monoclonal antibodies. So they're much more selective, and they have different kinds of side effects. But prednisone has major side effects. It's major physical side effects. So I put on a huge amount of weight. I weighed like, 240, 250 pounds in high school. It's called a Cushioid face. My skin thinned. So I have like stretch marks. I have cataracts. There's all of these, physical symptoms that, result from the side effects of prednisone. But more significant than that in my life, being obese was not good in high school. That was not a good look. But even more challenging is that prednisone can induce psychological side effects. Depression, anxiety, and mood swings are characteristic of prednisone. But nobody bothered to tell me that. Nobody bothered to say anything about it. I mean, literally, I once went to the gastroenterologist with my mom, and this was after I put on a lot of weight. And she was like, we're just kind of wondering, he seems to have put on a lot of weight. And my gastroenterologist said, well, he's just big boned. And I was like, no, I'm not. Look, my wrists are tiny. I'm like, what are you talking about? But this is, and then, but there was no way at that time, apart from like if you had access to a medical library, to do research to find out what the side effects are. I mean, now you just go on drugs.com and, it'll tell you everything. But, then there was nothing. So, so I was basically on or having, what I consider to be a drug-induced mental illness from the time I was 13 to the time I was 23, which no one bothered to think about. And nobody really thought it was a problem because I was an adolescent. So they were just like, oh, you're just a teenager. it's horrible. Whatever. I mean,
Yeah, back then it was always that, right? It was always like, oh, you're just being a rebel. You're just being a bratty kid. Like,
I'm like, oh, I mean, I literally once, my dad's a physical chemist. So he doesn't believe that medicine is a science, which he's correct. It is not a science. But like therapy, that was like, especially in the 1970s.
yeah.
So, but at one point I was like, I knew something was wrong. I knew it was like, and so I was like, oh, send me to therapy. I want to go to therapy. And my father said, you've seen too many Woody Allen movies.
That's who you remind me of, Ed, is Woody Allen. I was like, Ed reminds me of somebody. Before we went live, I was like, okay, I'm trying to think of the actor. He reminds me of somebody I used to watch. That just gives my age away too, right?
Yeah. Well, see, this is the good thing about having been really sick when you're young, is it makes aging a really positive thing. Like when I was young, they didn't really say you're going to die early, but they, there were like these suggestions. This was not good for longevity. So, now, I'm going to be 65 this year. And I'm like, hey, right on. It's my 50th anniversary of Crohn's. I'm like, it's my golden anniversary. Yes. All my friends are like,
we're not like, oh my God.
Exactly. Like all my friends are like, oh, it's aches, it's pains. I'm like, you don't even know. Shut up.
Let's just party. We did it.
It's like, yeah, exactly. I mean, of course, I did learn about healing in the process. So, I mean, like I am an almost 65-year-old. I am very, very, what am I going to say? I'm in good shape. I'm in good form for my.
Well, you're not big bone, right?
I'm not big boned anymore. No, my bones have shrunk. So basically, at 13, I got on the prednisone. I was given, this explanation that I was eating myself alive. I was like out of my mind. I was obese. I was incontinent because the prednisone never really worked. So I went everywhere with a little baggie with underwear and wipes, and I developed a psychic ability, which I still have, that I can find where a toilet is. Like, you could put me in any, architecture.
Over there. Ask him where the bathroom is.
I mean, it was crazy. Oh, yeah. I couldn't, So, and that went on for basically 10 years through college. I mean, and because I was just, I was just a kid. So, I went to high school. I did high school things. I went to college. I did great. And, I'm like, I'm an intellectual. I'm a know-it-all. What am I going to say? I mean, I do really well. So then I went to college. Then I went to graduate school. The whole time I'm taking the drugs. I'm going to the bathroom. And then when I was in graduate school at Stanford, I started getting a really acute phase again. And they ratcheted up the prednisone, didn't really do much. And then I was visiting my parents at a certain, like over spring break or something. And my parents live in this small town in Northern Maryland. And I had what's called a small bowel obstruction. My bowel closed off because it was inflamed. And I was taken to a local hospital. That's like that's giving it too much credit. It really was, I don't know. It was just sort of like a clinic with some people who didn't know anything. Anyway, I had a small bowel perforation that went undetected. So as a result, when the flora and fauna in your gut break out and get into your abdominal cavity, basically it's like a high-end spa for bacteria. It's moist, it's warm. They're like, hey, yeah, great. So, but at the time we didn't know that. So, I went back to school, fortunately, because I was at Stanford, which is, like incredible hospital. I mean, world class, whatever. And then I started having these symptoms. One night I was at the movies and I had like just horrible pains, and I rushed home, and basically I passed out on the bathroom floor with blood gushing out of my anus. And then I was taken in an ambulance to the hospital. They did a bunch of tests. They couldn't really find anything. They sent me home. They gave me more prednisone. Then I bleed again. Then they put me back in the hospital. Then, and then when I was in the hospital, I started spiking these fevers at it was 18-hour intervals. Every 18 hours, I would have 104 fever. And as a result, they knew I had some kind of infection, but they didn't really know what it was. So they put me in what's called the Hoover Pavilion, which was like the fancy part of the hospital. And I realized later, I was like, well, it's great. I have a private room in the fancy part. But it was because it was 1982, and that was the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. And I had this unexplainable infectious disease. And so one day the infectious diseases team came into my room, and it was right after the CDC published the first reports about AIDS based in LA. And they came in and they were like, well, we know you're gay, and we just read this report about, these unexplained infectious illnesses among gay men that seem to be sexually transmitted. And, we're just wondering, do you think you might have that? And I was like, okay, look, I've been incontinent for 10 years and I've been on prednisone. And frankly, that's not a really sexy look. So like that has not
now you're coming at me with this.
I'm like, really? And you're telling me? And so I said, so unless you believe in immaculate infection, no, I don't have that. And then we all laughed and whatever. Of course, the irony of that was my highest risk for getting HIV was because of all of the blood transfusions that I was having. I was having massive blood transfusions in the Bay Area. Fortunately, it didn't happen. I was lucky. So, when I was in the hospital, I had one more massive bleed out, at which time they couldn't stop the bleeding. And they were trying to stabilize me enough to get me to emergency surgery. And I started having an out-of-body, what people describe as an out-of-body near-death thing. And I knew something was going on because not only was I like floating above everything, but like I was like super calm. And first of all, in general, I wasn't a super calm person, but I've been on prednisone for 10 years. I mean, like, as I said, I had a, pharmaceutically induced anxiety. Yeah. So I was like, whoa, this is really different.
This is like a really bad trip. It's too slow for me.
So then, they eventually got me stabilized enough to rush me to emergency surgery. I mean, I do remember they're taking me on the gurney down the hall, and I'm like flying above the gurney. I'm like, woo! And so next thing I know, I wake up in the ICU, and they've told me I've had a small bowel resection. They had to take out parts of my liver. I was all, abscessed, and I had to be put on IV antibiotics because I was completely infected. But then simultaneously, I had to be weaned off the prednisone because prednisone impedes tissue repair. And so two things happen. So when you're put on prednisone, it can cause a mental illness. When you're taken off prednisone, it can cause a mental illness. They didn't tell me that. So anyway, so then I'm in the hospital on the IV drugs. I'm on the painkillers. I'm getting off the prednisone. And I don't know, spontaneously, I started going into trances. And yeah, nothing in my life prepared me for that. I mean, as I mentioned before, my parents were cultural Jews. They were dogmatic atheists. I mean, my mother was a communist. My father was a physical chemist. Matter was all that mattered. So, I was not like on a spiritual trip or anything. I just thought I was doing pain management. I could listen to my music on my Walkman. I mean, that's how long ago it was a Walkman. And I could go into this realm where it was filled with light, and I could somehow like gather the light and then basically just pack it around, the parts of my, viscera that had been operated on. And I really just thought I was doing pain management because it could like damp the pain. And then when that would happen, I could just fall into this very peaceful place, which was not the hospital. Like if anybody's ever spent time in a hospital, it is not a peaceful place. There's no peace in the hospital.
No,
but I'd be
like easy in there.
It
It's like they gotta quiet it down a bit.
I mean, this is one of the things. If you're acutely ill, hospitals are fabulous. They keep you alive. The life support part of a hospital is really good, but they know nothing about healing. I mean, that's basically I'm going on and on about my story, but basically it's because I had this extreme other experience where I had no idea about healing. Nobody ever mentioned healing to me. And then I had these trances, and which, I didn't think of as healing or anything. I didn't, and then finally, I was in the hospital for a long time because I was on the IV antibiotics and, everything else. And I had been so sick. But eventually, when I was released a couple months later, I had an exit interview with my surgeon, who was very, very, very handsome. Stanford surgeon. He drove this very fancy Porsche. He's like, and he said this thing to me that just was like, seared itself into my brain. He said two things, but he said, "You are the sickest person I've operated on in 5 years who's still alive, and I don't know how you got better so quickly." Now, both of those things freaked me out because, first of all, I had not really been thinking about that I had almost died. I mean, even though I had this, what after the fact I thought of as a near death out of body experience, at the time I was, and I was 23. I'm not thinking I'm dying. I'm just thinking I have Crohn's. This is another thing. So I'm like, ooh, okay, I almost died. And then, but the most shocking part was when he said, "I don't know." Okay, first of all, that was the first time I heard a doctor say, "I don't know. I don't know how you got better so quickly." Now that blew my mind. That really made me have to check, what I had assumed about what medicine could do for me. And then, but that wasn't the end of the drama, of course, because then after I got out of the hospital, I had this prednisone withdrawal. And when you're taking off prednisone too quickly, it can cause psychotic episodes, which fortunately I didn't have, or it can cause dissociation. That's what I had. I was dissociated. And it went on for a few months, and nobody said anything about it. And I didn't really say anything, to my gastroenterologist. I mean, what was that? I mean, they just ask you about your bowel movements. They don't ask you about like how you're feeling. So at a certain point, I was trying to explain to one of my roommates how I felt, and she freaked out, and she's like, "I can't talk to you. Go to a therapist," which was very good advice.
But you wanted to when you were a little.
I did. I finally got to. Honest to God,
somebody's telling me I go.
I got to go to therapy, and I have been in therapy ever since. I mean, so I went to this therapist who was not the right therapist in many regards. I mean, one of my roommates was at the time exploring her bisexuality and her relations with other women, and she was going to this therapist who at the time was like kind of famous as the lesbian sex therapist, because you mentioned we were going to talk about sex, so I thought I'd better first.
No, we're talking about
that. So she wrote a book about what was called lesbian bed death, which was like why lesbians, in long-term relationships stop having sex. And during the very brief period of time that I saw her, she was actually on Oprah. So my mom called me one day and said, "Oh, I saw your therapist on Oprah talking about lesbian bed death." I was like, "Oh, great. That's so great, Mom." But Joanne was like, Joanne was not, but she was perfect because I was in there 5 minutes. I was telling her what's going on. She goes, "Stop." She's like, "You're having a drug withdrawal?" my sister had Crohn's. She had the same thing. You need to go to this other person who my sister's been seeing. And that was the most brilliant thing that anyone ever did for me. Because she sent me to this woman, Rachel Remen, who, I mean, I don't know if you know her. If you don't know her, you must immediately go and buy her books. She's written 2 books. One's called Kitchen Table Wisdom, and another one's called Blessings My Grandfather Gave Me. And actually, she has a new children's book that just came out. And she's amazing. She's amazing. I mean, she's been, there's this Bill Moyer special on her in a series called Healing in the Mind. Rachel is a doctor. She was the pediatric endocrinologist at Stanford. She went to Cornell Medical School. She did a residency at Sloan Kettering. Very, very accomplished, physician. And she has Crohn's disease. And she's like 20 years older than me. So when she got treated, she got diagnosed, and the treatments were even cruder than they were compared to now, what happened to me would never happen. I mean, nobody would be on prednisone for 10 years. That's just not a thing. But going to Rachel, so at that time, Rachel had been working at Stanford Hospital, and she was offered to be the director of pediatrics, and she quit because the tension between being a doctor and being a patient, became really great. And instead, she started a practice on a houseboat in Sausalito that was owned by Alan Watts for people with chronic and life-threatening illnesses, and for what she called recovering doctors. And that was amazing. I mean, she was the first doctor that I went to who mentioned healing, who affirmed healing. I told her my story. I told her about the trances and everything. And it was amazing. I mean, well, first of all, it was the first amazing thing she did, like right at the beginning of the first session, when I'm telling her, what's going on. And then she's like, same thing as like Joanne. She just stopped. She's like, stop. And literally I'm in the office, and she called my gastroenterologist on the phone while I'm sitting there. And I guess because, she was a Stanford doctor, she knew how to get through the switchboard or whatever. And she got him on the phone. And I mean, Rachel has a very quiet voice, very calm. She's like a bodhisattva. She has amazing. And so she wasn't yelling at him or anything, but she was very calmly, but very forcefully telling him that he had really fucked up in treating me, and that how could he have not told me that there might be side effects to what was going on. So that was really amazing to have an Ivy League fancy doctor tell my other doctor that he didn't know how to take care of me, because I just assumed, like most of us do when we go to the doctors. I mean, it's a little less so now because we have Dr. Google, and we can, but but I just assumed that doctors knew what they were doing, I didn't. So that was so the first part of the session was blew my mind, because I was like, ooh, okay. Then the second part, when I'm telling her what goes on, and she said to me, she's like, look, medicine knows a lot of things, and science is really, can provide us with a lot of information about the mechanics of physiology and whatever, but it doesn't know everything. Yeah. And there are definitely other ways to be in the world and other ways to imagine what's happening. And your experience, she's like, because I was at that point, I was just well, these trances, these things that I mean, did that have an effect? And she's like, look, that was real. Medicine is not the only reality. And working with her just completely changed my life. I mean, that's, in part because of that experience that I now work, with people who have chronic and life-threatening illnesses in my practice. Because, I feel like that was gifted to me. most of us don't have resources like that, and I had the opportunity to work with an amazing teacher. And she was just the first. She just opened the door, and after that, and then she then encouraged me to go to do body work. Like, I had been so sick for so long and on drugs and whatever. You can imagine I had no positive relationship to being a living organism. I mean, literally in one of the sessions with her, so she did work and I do the same thing with guided imagery. And it's a very powerful technique that can be really helpful just to give us other ways of reflecting on who we are and what's possible. And one of the images that I got for my experience was that basically my head was cut off, at the neck. And so my head and my body were separate, but I had this rusted iron collar with this rusty lock that kept the two of them together. And that was how I basically experienced myself. It was like from the neck up, which just like funny side story. When not really. When I was in high school, but
I think humor has kept you where you are today, Ed. Without humor, sometimes it gets so serious that we're just like, oh, I can't do it, right?
Oh, if you can't laugh at it. No, absolutely. Come on. Like that's, in general about life, I'm like, so this is my current way of, being in life is to imagine, like what I always say is like, what is the healing that birth took me for in this life? It's like that. I don't know if that's true or whatever. It's an as if, but it's a way of framing like, oh, well, when things happen, rather than, of course, shit happens all the time. And I'm like, that I wanted my book to be called Shit Happens. That was original.
You know what? We talked about shit this morning too. Sometimes you just get stuck in the shit. You just gotta wipe it off and keep going.
Exactly. So, shit happens. But as I always say, and this is from Hello Dolly, but, shit happens. But, manure is a really good fertilizer. You just have to learn how to treat it, So it's like, and so the humor is like a way of treating the shit, as far as I'm, that transforms it into fertilizer. But for the neck up thing was like, when I was in high school, I went to a giant high school. There was 3,600 kids, and my class had like almost 1,000 people, and at the end of the year they vote, the senior class votes on, different people being, most successful, most whatever. I was elected biggest brain. Okay, that was not enough thing. And biggest mouth, because you can imagine that.
But you know what? You sound like a fun guy to be around. Like,
Yeah, but I was the only person with two body parts, but they were all from the neck up. Right, that was like so, what Rachel did was send me to work with a woman named Chloe Scott, who's amazing, who was a Feldenkrais practitioner. And if you don't know anything about Feldenkrais, again, it's an amazing practice. It's called awareness through movement is the trademark, or also functional integration is part of it as well, but awareness through movement. And again, he was like an amazing teacher. And his thing really was about learning. So, his story, similar to Rachel's, like the wounded healer kind of thing. He was Israeli. He was a scientist. He has a PhD from the Sorbonne in engineering and physics. He developed all the laboratory apparatuses that the Curies used when they did their experiments. They got the Nobel Prize for. He was Jewish, so when the Germans, were invading France, he went to England. He was also a black belt in judo, and he was a soccer player, and he blew out his knees playing soccer, and they basically were like, oh, there's nothing we can do. It was before, this is in the 40s. And he's like, screw that. I'm going to, figure out some other stuff. And what he realized, he studied physiology and kinesiology and all that stuff. And he realized, well, most of the things that challenge us physically are repetitive stress injuries. Because we learn to move at certain moments in our lives when we're children, when we're actually not neurologically and muscularly developed enough to actually have effective ways of organizing ourselves to move efficiently without friction and stress. So like a really good example is like watching babies learn to walk, right? When a baby learns to walk, it doesn't, first of all, know how to walk. It's not neurologically or muscularly ready to walk, right? But it sees everybody around it walking. It wants to walk, and we encourage them to want to walk. So we, as adults, project onto them this developmental possibility that then they begin, they haul themselves up onto the coffee table or whatever, but they don't know how to organize their muscles, right? And then we lie to them, right? So then they totter, and we're like, you're walking. No, they're not walking, they're falling.
You did it. You're such a big boy.
Exactly. But as a result of that, most of us, unless you're retrained as an athlete or a dancer or something, or yoga or whatever, most of us, when we learn to walk, we do it inefficiently. We actually use our abductors to clench. We clench. And that's why many people have hip problems, like myself included, later in life, because we actually have organized our movement, and it's basically neuromuscularly patterned. But what Feldenkrais realizes, we use just a tiny portion of that neurological muscular potential. That there's much more that's available to us, and so he developed this practice called awareness through movement. That really was perfect for someone like me, like a head case, because it meant using what was my strength, which was my ability to think, right, to bring my awareness to different aspects of my body that I was not in touch with, and to learn to utilize them in different ways. But it does this amazing thing, because it's not just muscular, it's also changing your brain. Because that's what learning is, right? Learning is creating new synaptic connections. So whenever you learn, anything like physically or mentally or whatever, you're changing your brain state. And it's neurochemical, it's neuroelectrical, but it was amazing. I did that for 5 years. I almost became a practitioner. It just gave me a whole new set of tools to be alive. In a way that, and that was just the beginning. I've been doing this for 40 years. I've done every kind of movement, breath, yoga, tai chi, auric cleansing. I do it all. And some of it works better than others. And some, I love the acupuncture. Right now, I'm addicted to rolfing, which is another. It's a fascia, neurofascial body technique. It's amazing. And as I said, I've been in therapy ever since I was 23. So basically, what happened was I went from being clueless, and basically inside of the medical model, as if that was the only way of understanding what was happening to me, to suddenly having this entirely new set of possibilities and resources. And over the last 40 years, of course, I still have Crohn's. It doesn't go away, right? It's incurable, but you don't have to have symptoms. When I came to realize, and I think many people with chronic illnesses have similar kinds of experiences, is that when I have symptomatic responses, that can be a barometer of the way I am living my life in the world that I exist in. That and that if I'm having symptoms, something's out of balance. And maybe that's, if I can redress it, because not all the time, we're in the world, so shit happens.
Yep, shit happens.
Shit happens. You're not in charge of it all the time. But to know that, oh, this is not some just weird thing that my body is doing to me. First of all, and then this is just one of my insane things, but even the idea that there is such a thing as my body is a crazy way that we have of thinking about what it means to be a living organism. One of the Canadian First Nations peoples, the Okanagan, in their idiom, instead of talking about the body, their way of understanding it is they call it the land dreaming capacity, which I think is so beautiful. It's just amazing. But even if you want to be scientific, because my dad was Mr. Science, so I have to do that. It's like,
well, that's where the brains come in, right?
There's no such thing as the body, right? If we think about it, like what's actually happening, we're not things, we're events, right? We're processes. So a much better way of understanding what we call the body is we are transformations of matter and energy localized in time and space. And we are not separated from the environment, from the world. We only exist in environments, right? We have really, in our cultures, very misguided ways of understanding what it means to be a living organism. It's one of the things like with the COVID that at a certain level, it seemed to me, it made it really obvious that the idea that we're individuals separated from one another, is biologically counterfactual. Like, we are actually entangled with each other. We are touching each other all the time. We're at the beginning of the COVID when they were like, okay, don't touch each other. That was like this, what they call a natural experiment. Because all of a sudden, people had to realize, oh, we touch each other all the time. Right? It was like actually really hard. Oh, I can't touch. Social distance.
Right, like a day before, everybody was told not to touch. Everybody's touching everybody, and now it's like, oh.
Well, and the word contagion, it means touching together. That's the etymology of the word. It means together, touching. We are touching all the time, and that's why it was so crazy. The people who were like, oh, not going to wear a mask, not going to get vaccinated, whatever. I mean, that, it's an investment in the idea that somehow I'm fundamentally separate and I'm in charge of me, and it's like that I'm independent. And I'm always having to remind my students and anybody, it's like, okay, look at it. Independent. Independence is just another form of dependence in denial. And how do you know that? Look at the word. There is no word independent without the word dependent. The word independence depends on dependence. It's like really that, and you would have thought that COVID might have helped us recognize that. But, but we haven't. And in part, it's because, and this is, what my books have been about. You mentioned I wrote a book called A Body Worth Defending, which is about the history of how we came to think about immunity as a biological function. And that's sort of nuts to me, because actually for more than 2,000 years, immunity was only a political and legal idea. It still functions that way. I mean, in the United States, Donald Trump is constantly claiming that he has immunity from prosecution. The reason that, churches don't pay taxes is because they're immune. Or the reason that people can take asylum in a church is because churches are immune. Right? So it is a very powerful legal, not just concept, but it's actually a strategy. It's a way that the law maintains a fiction that it's universal by allowing there to be exceptions that are legally defined as exceptions. So even though the law is not being applied, it's being legally not applied. But only in the end of the 19th century did immunity get recruited by medicine as a way of describing how it is that organisms of different scales, like microscopic and macroscopic, coexist in the same environments. And, and it was defined as a form of host defense. I mean, we now know that what we call immunity is not simply defensive, that it's much more complicated than that. And, but the logic of immunity is predicated on this idea that we're fundamentally in this like skin envelope, like who we are is this, like we're in
We're all wrapped up. Don't touch us. We're in that bubble wrap. Leave us alone.
Exactly. So yeah, so basically what I've been doing for 40 years is trying to unwrap the bubble wrap. And what I found was that in being able to unwrap the bubble wrap, I'm finding other ways to more gracefully move through the world, that I have significantly fewer symptoms. I mean, of course I do, because, I don't have all my intestines anymore. So, that is a thing. But
just an extra body part, right?
That's why I still have to have my psychic powers about the toilet.
I know where it is. Well, Ed, we're almost at the hour. I'm having so much fun here. But before we wrap up, I want to get your tea out there. I want everyone to understand. Ed, I'm having a blast with you this afternoon. If I give you the word TEA, what tea are you going to serve me? And
okay, yeah, so I got T for transformation. It's all about change. Healing is all about changing and growing. That's the difference between healing and curing. Curing is about, somehow pretending like we can go back to the way that we used to be before we had any symptoms. And, I don't know, if you've noticed this, but in life, there's no going back. It's only going forward. So I'm all about the transformation. Then, am I supposed to give you an E?
Yeah, give me my E and my A. And let's do a cheer.
My E is, well, bad, but enlightenment. I will use enlightenment. I'm a teacher, and the reason I'm a teacher is because I love to learn things, and there's nothing better once you've learned something than sharing it with others. So enlightenment is my way of being. It's also my job. I mean, I get paid for it, so. And my A is attention, because what I've learned is, over the years, is that what we attend to and what we intend, right, through attention and intention, we actually, that is how transformation happens, by changing our capacity to attend to different possibilities than those that we take for granted, that we think are self-evident. And to understand that there's a lot more, like, the first chapter in my book on learning to heal is called We're More Than We Know. We're more than
there
we know.
You go. We got a strong cup of tea. We have transformation, enlightenment, and attention. And we were talking about this tea before we even went live. And, I was really surprised with the word attention. And for when you said attention, it was like, pay attention. Like, hello, guys, pay attention. I'm here. It doesn't matter. I'm big bone. I'm small bone. I'm here. Pay attention, right? That's what I got when you gave me the word attention. It was really just, here's my story. Pay attention, and take care of your health. So
absolutely. So I'll leave you with one thing. So this is what Rachel Remen, my great teacher, said to me. She said, all of the wisdom traditions in the world can probably be boiled down to four things. Show up, pay attention, tell the truth, don't be attached to the outcome.
What's the last one?
Don't be attached to the outcome.
Don't be, I like
that. That's the hardest one.
Yeah, because we attach ourselves to stuff because we're always touching, we're always together.
Well, but also, like, you know, touch the outcome, like in relationships to, that's the difference between healing and curing. Curing has an outcome. I'm gonna go back to the way that I used to be, whereas healing, you know what? Sometimes dying is healing. I mean, we don't know, right? So don't be attached to the outcome, because there's always more possibility than we can imagine at this given moment. And that's what life has to offer us. And maybe that's what life is about. You know, what we're doing here is trying, at least from my perspective, you know, one thing that we might benefit from being alive is to actually learn these new possibilities for ways of being. Because look at history. I mean, the way we live now, nobody has ever lived before. I mean, we're, for better or worse, we're on the cutting edge. I mean, I don't know if we're going to continue evolving or we're going to
Right? You're
go out.
Or we'll find a bathroom. So Ed, before we wrap up, because we got less than 5 minutes here, what message would you like for everyone to hear about your story and your book, and where can they get it?
So, you know, my main thing that I want people to understand is that healing happens. It is a possibility. It's not the same as curing. It's not the same as treating. You know, healing, learning, developing, growing, these are possibilities that capacities that we have throughout our entire lives. It is what it means to be alive. And unfortunately, because of the culture that we live in, and, you know, paradoxically, even because of the resources that we have, we often, you know, outsource our healing to other people, to doctors, to other healthcare practitioners, and we pay them to know things about us that we don't know about ourselves. And the question is, well, why do we know that? Like, why didn't I know? I mean, for 10 years, why didn't I know I had this capacity to heal? I mean, I had the capacity to heal, but I didn't know about it. And so, you know, basically, you know, what I'm trying to encourage people just to reflect on is, well, what would healing mean for you, like in your life at this moment? You know, whether you're having symptoms or whether you're having problems at work. Or healing isn't just a physiological thing, it's also a psychological thing, but it's also a social thing. And let's face it, so much in our world needs healing today. You know, our communities, our cultures, our species, look, our planet. You know, and I always use like this example, like so that people can understand, like, you know, the ozone layer. Like, I don't know if, you know, if you remember, but there was this period, you know, in the 80s and 90s, and they were like, oh my God, there's this giant hole in the ozone layer. And we, you know, successfully, fluorocarbons were banned. And guess what? The ozone layer has closed. The planet has the capacity to heal, right? Look at that. So, you know, healing happens at every level. It happens at a biological level, a psychological level, a social level, a political level, a spiritual level, a planetary level. And if we can resonate to that, you know, both in our particular lives and in our collective lives, then I think, you know, we might have a much better chance of not going extinct. That would be the thing. If you want to contact me on that happy note, my website is healingcouncil.com, and it explains my practice. I have a counseling practice for anybody interested in healing at any of those levels. I often work with people with chronic and life-threatening conditions, but not exclusively, because, as I say, healing can be, you know, lots of different things. And you can get my books. My new book is called On Learning to Heal, or What Medicine Doesn't Know. And you can access it on my website, or you can get it anywhere. It's a trade book. It's available for Amazon. I don't like to promote Amazon, but, you know, at your favorite bookseller, your, like, local bookseller might have a copy. I don't know. Or they can get it for you. So, but it's out there. And yeah, and if you're interested in contacting me through my website, I have link, a page, where you can contact me. And if you're interested in seeing, if you'd like to work with me, I give 15-minute free consultation. And then after that, you can decide, or we can decide, if that's something you'd like to do.
Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you here. I didn't think I'd ever meet Woody Allen in person.
Okay, the Woody Allen, because given all the other stuff about Woody Allen, I mean, like, I'm Woody Allen-esque,
You would make a good improv of Woody Allen. Like you would bring the room alive. I want to thank you, Ed, and I want to thank all the viewers and listeners who tuned in today. Thank you for all of your questions and all of that good stuff and all your good support. For anybody that would like to see this Tea Time, go over to the YouTube channel, give it a subscribe. You can watch it at your own pace. You can watch 5 minutes, you can watch 10 minutes, you can watch the whole hour, but you watch it at your own pace. And I want to thank you, Ed, for sharing your story with me.
It's a pleasure.
You really brought in an afternoon of delight for me, and I really need it right now. So I want to thank you for that. And I will be back at 7 p.m. for the last show of this week with Miranda O, and we'll be talking about chins up, tits out. That's right. We're going to do sex all the way today. This morning we talked about porn addiction. This afternoon we're talking about Crohn's and women's genders and sex and shit. We just throw it all out here on Tea Time. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and I will see everybody at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the last show of this week in June.